Montana Territory, October 1878. The cold bit hard the night Marigold Fletcher ran. The moon sharp above the pines as she left everything behind her bruises, her wedding ring, and the man who had made both. Her breath came in short bursts as she clutched the hem of her wool skirt and bolted through the woods. Behind her, the house loomed dark and wide, the windows like watching eyes. She had waited until he passed out with a bottle in his hand, same as every night, but this time she had not stayed. She did not cry. She had done enough of that. By the time dawn broke, her boots were soaked, her fingers numb, but she had made it nearly 15 miles west, to the edge of the Red Willow Creek Basin. There, tucked behind the ridge, was the small homestead she had heard about in whispers at the general store. The one owned by Nathaniel Tucker, the cowboy who kept to himself and never looked for trouble. Marigold had only spoken to him once, months ago, when he had tipped his hat and helped her gather spilled apples outside the mercantile while her husband shouted from the wagon. She had not forgotten the steadiness in his eyes. Now she was standing on his porch in the blue light of morning, shivering and clutching a basket with nothing inside but a change of clothes and a Bible. The door opened before she could knock twice. Nathaniel stood there, shirt half-buttoned, boots unlaced, hair mussed from sleep. He stared at her a second too long, blinked, then stepped aside. "Get in," he said. She did. He stoked the fire and poured her hot coffee without asking questions. She kept her eyes on the crackling flame. "I will not go back," she said quietly. "I did not figure you would," Nathaniel answered. She looked at him then. "If he comes looking, he will not find you here." Marigold's breath hitched. For the first time in years, someone had said that and meant it. Nathaniel turned away, grabbed a wool blanket from the chair, and handed it to her. "You can sleep in the loft. I will bring up some food in a bit. If you want to talk, you can. If not, that is fine too." She nodded, gripping the blanket hard enough to turn her knuckles white. He paused before heading out the door. "I am not scared of him." Marigold's voice cracked. "You should be." Nathaniel gave a quiet shrug. "I have faced worse than cowards who hit women." He left her then, and she climbed the ladder to the loft and lay down in the hay's sweet warmth, the blanket tucked around her shoulders. For the first time in over 3 years, she slept without fear. The next few days passed slow. Nathaniel kept busy outside mending fence, chopping wood, riding out to check the cattle that grazed on the foothills north of the creek. He never asked about her past, never reached for her, never looked at her with pity. Marigold stayed indoors mostly, helping where she could, sweeping, baking, tending the small vegetable patch behind the house. She still flinched at every unexpected noise, still jumped when shadows moved fast, but the bruises had faded, and her hands steadied more each day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the hills, she finally spoke. "I married him when I was 18. My father owed him money. Thought it would solve things." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He was sweet at first. Then came the drinking. Then the hitting. "I tried to leave once 2 years ago. He broke my ribs and told the sheriff I had fallen from the wagon." Nathaniel did not move, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped his cup. "I thought no one would ever help me," she said. "Then I remembered you. That day with the apples. You looked at me like I was still a person." Nathaniel turned toward her, slow and sure. "You are." She looked down at her lap. "I am scared he will come." "I am not," Nathaniel said. "And you do not have to be either. Not anymore." She blinked hard, then nodded. "Thank you." His voice was low, steady. "You are safe here, Marigold." She believed him. 2 weeks passed. Snow dusted the ridge one morning, and Marigold pulled her shawl tighter as they worked together to bring in the last of the squash. Nathaniel had built her a small writing desk near the window and gave her space when she needed it. But he was always nearby, always steady. One night, a storm rolled in, and thunder cracked above the hills. Marigold woke in the loft, heart pounding, breath tight. Without thinking, she climbed down and crossed the small cabin to where Nathaniel lay on his cot near the stove. He sat up fast, eyes sharp. "What is it?" She swallowed. "The thunder. I could not." Nathaniel stood and reached for his coat. "Come on. I will show you something." She followed him into the barn, where the horses snorted at their arrival. He lit a lantern and led her to the far stall, where a mare and her foal lay curled in the straw. "Whenever storms come, she curls around the little one like that. Keeps her safe." He looked at Marigold. "Sometimes you just need someone to stand between you and the worst of it." She looked up at him, chest tight. "Is that what you are doing?" He met her gaze. "Always." She did not pull away when he brushed a lock of hair from her face. Did not flinch when he laid a hand on her cheek. "I am not broken," she whispered. "I know. I am just tired." "You can rest here," Nathaniel said. "As long as you need." She nodded, and for the first time in years, leaned into someone's touch. 3 more weeks passed. They laughed now soft, surprised laughter that bubbled up when she burned the bread or when he tripped over the cat that had decided to stay. They shared meals, stories, quiet silences by the fire, and sometimes their hands brushed and neither of them moved away. Then one morning, Nathaniel found her on the porch, basket in hand, eyes wide with panic. "He is here." Nathaniel stepped around her and saw the figure on horseback crossing the ridge. Marigold's husband. Nathaniel did not speak. He saddled his horse, checked his rifle, and rode out without a word. It was not a long fight. The man was drunk, angry, and full of bluster. Nathaniel did not shoot him, just knocked him off his horse and told him 3 clear things. "She is not yours. She is not coming back. And if you ever come near her again, I will not miss next time." Then he sent him packing, bleeding from the nose and swearing. When Nathaniel returned, Marigold was waiting at the fence, eyes full of tears. "You could have been killed." "Not today." She stepped closer. "Why would you do that for me?" Nathaniel looked at her, quiet and sure. "Because you matter. Because I care about you. And because I want you here. Not just safe. I want you with me." Her breath caught. "I want that too." He took her hand. And this time she did not let go. Nathaniel kept a kettle of vinegar water warming by the stove, steam rising in faint curls as he scrubbed the blood from his knuckles with a rag. Marigold stood at the wash basin, twisting a damp cloth between her hands. Neither had spoken since he returned, the air filled with the low hiss of boiling water and the creak of the wind against the shutters. "You didn't have to fight him," she said, eyes fixed on the rag in her hands. Nathaniel looked up. "He gave me no choice." "He always gives a choice," she murmured. "But most men don't take the hard one." He tossed the rag into the pail beside the stove. "I'm not most." Marigold turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You know he'll talk. Tell folks he came for his wife and got ambushed. They'll believe him." "They might," Nathaniel said. "But folks around here know what he is. And I've lived here longer than his lies will." She crossed the room slowly and sat at the edge of the table. "I don't want to hide for the rest of my life." "You won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've decided not to let you." He met her eyes. "I've got land, stock, and no one to leave it to. I've got plenty of room for someone who wants to stay." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the sky had begun to pink with the first signs of evening. "I haven't decided what I want yet," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "Then I'll wait." A long quiet settled between them. He moved to the hearth and stirred the stew he'd left simmering since morning. The scent of onions and dried thyme filled the cabin. "Did you ever want a family?" she asked. He didn't turn around. "Once. A long while ago." "What happened?" "She died. Before it could become anything more." Marigold folded her hands in her lap. "You never speak of it." "No one ever asked." She watched the lines of his shoulders, the way they held steady even when his voice didn't. "I never had children either," she said. "He didn't want them. Said it would make things harder." Nathaniel ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table without comment. She studied him closely as he sat down across from her. "I used to wonder if something was wrong with me for not leaving sooner," she said. "You left," he replied. "That's what matters." "I still wake up thinking I'm there," she said. "Like I'll open my eyes and he'll be standing over me." "You won't," Nathaniel said. "Not here." They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the wind died down, and the fire cracked softly in the stove. After the bowls were cleared, she stood and walked to the shelf beside the hearth. Her fingers drifted over the spines of books, pausing on one with worn leather binding. "You read these?" she asked. "Most of them," he said. "Helps pass the winters." She opened the book and thumbed through a few pages. "I used to read before I was married. Mostly poetry." "You can still," he said. She looked over her shoulder. "I'd like that. Then take whichever ones you want." She smiled faintly and pulled the book down, tucking it beneath her arm. That night she didn't climb into the loft. She sat beside Nathaniel while he read and let her head rest lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak, just turned the pages slowly, his warmth steady beside her. When the fire burned low, she rose. "I should go up," she said. Nathaniel stood too. "You don't have to." She hesitated. "I'm not ready. For more. Not yet." "I know. But I don't want to sleep alone tonight." He nodded once, then pulled the cot's blanket back and stepped aside. She climbed in and lay on her side, facing the wall. He lay behind her, not touching, just close, quiet. When her breath evened out and her heartbeat slowed, she whispered, "Thank you, Nathaniel." His voice came low. "You're welcome, Marigold." And for the first time, she believed there could be a future that didn't begin with fear. The frost came early that year, tracing the edges of the windows in pale silver. Nathaniel woke before first light, the room still dark but for the faint glow of embers in the stove. Beside him, Marigold breathed slow and even, her back warm against his chest. He slid carefully from the cot, not waking her, and began the day as he always did, with firewood and silence. Outside, the wind carried the smell of pine and the promise of snow. He fed the chickens, checked the smokehouse, then rode out to the northern fence line to mend a broken post. By the time he returned, the sky had lightened and smoke curled from the chimney. She was up. She wore his old wool shirt over her dress, sleeves rolled to the elbows. A pot of cornmeal mush steamed on the stove, and she was sweeping the ash from the hearth with a willow-handled broom. "You don't have to do that," he said, brushing the mud from his boots. "I know," she replied, not looking up. "But I like to." He crossed the room, poured himself coffee, then leaned against the doorframe. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough," she said, pausing to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I dreamed of my brother. Haven't in years." Nathaniel waited. He was older by 4 years. Taught me how to ride bareback and whittle wood into birds. When he died in the war, I didn't speak for a week. Her voice softened. He was the only one who ever asked me what I wanted. Nathaniel stirred the coffee with a slow hand. "What would you tell him now?" She looked at him then. That I'm trying to remember who I was before everything went wrong. He didn't answer, just nodded once. That was enough. Later, they rode into town together. Supplies were thinning and the first real snow wasn't far off. Marigold wore a scarf pulled low over her brow. Not to hide, she didn't seem afraid anymore, but to keep out the cold. Nathaniel rode beside her, saying little. They always spoke more on the way back. At the mercantile, she picked out a bolt of calico the color of dried sage, 2 skeins of yarn, and a tin of goose grease for her hands. Nathaniel bought salt, flour, and a new bridle strap. The shopkeeper, Mr. Tolland, eyed them both but said nothing beyond the usual pleasantries. No one asked questions. On the ride home, she turned in the saddle. Do you ever miss being around people? A whole town of them. No, he said, but I miss hearing music sometimes. She smiled. I used to play piano. Not well, but enough to make my mother hum along. I'd play after supper, just before the lamps were lit. You ever think about playing again? She shifted in her seat. I never thought I'd have reason to again. He looked over at her. Maybe now you do. She didn't speak after that, but he saw the way her hands flexed on the reins, like they remembered keys beneath them. They reached the cabin just before dusk. Nathaniel unsaddled the horses while she unpacked the goods. When he stepped inside, she was standing by the window, the calico spread across the table. I want to make curtains with it, she said. Something soft between us and the wind. He set down the sack of flour. Anything you want. That night, she sat cross-legged on the floor before the fire, her fingers working the thread through the cloth with quiet purpose. Nathaniel watched from his chair, a book open but unread in his lap. Did you ever think, she said without looking up, that you'd live like this? With someone again? He took a long breath before answering. I didn't think I'd live at all past 25. Then I just kept going. One day turned into the next until I stopped expecting anything. She tied off a stitch and looked up. And now I wake up and hope you're still beside me. She didn't smile. Instead, she reached out and touched his knee, just the tips of her fingers against the worn denim. I want to build something with you, she said. Not just hide from what was. His hand covered hers. Then we will. The wind picked up outside, rattling the eaves. Inside, the fire burned steady and bright. They stayed there, the two of them, without speaking further. Nothing needed to be said. The storm that night brought snow thick as flour. In the morning, the world outside was white and still. Nathaniel stood at the door, watching the flakes drift, and felt something he hadn't in years. A beginning. The creek thawed in April, its edges glistening under the high Montana sun. Meltwater rushed over stones slick with moss, and the air carried the scent of damp pine and raw earth. Nathaniel stood in the pasture, sleeves rolled, watching the young steer test the fence line. He didn't hear Marigold approach until her fingers brushed his elbow. They've grown, she said, nodding to the cattle. They have, he said, not turning just yet. Spring's been good to them. She stepped beside him and leaned her forearms on the top rail. Her hair was braided back, the end tied with a strip of faded gingham. She wore the calico dress she'd sewn through the winter, the hem just brushing the tops of her boots. I've been thinking about putting in a rose hedge along the front of the house, she said. He looked at her now. You don't mind the thorns? I don't mind anything that grows where it's planted. He watched her a moment longer, then nodded. We'll dig the bed this week. She smiled without looking at him, eyes on the hills. I've never stayed in one place this long without wanting to leave. You planning to? No, she said. Not anymore. That evening, she brought out a tin box she'd kept tucked at the back of the cupboard. Inside were scraps of letters, bits of lace, and a small photograph of a woman in a white bonnet, her mother. She laid them out on the table with care, smoothing the creases. I used to think if I kept these hidden, the past couldn't touch me, she said, her voice low. But I don't want to keep hiding from anything. Nathaniel sat across from her, his hands resting on the tabletop. You don't have to. I know, she said. But I want you to know who I was before any of what happened. He didn't reach for the photograph. He just listened. My mother taught me to stitch, to read scripture out loud, to stand with both feet on the floor when I spoke my mind. She died before I married. If she'd lived, I think I might have chosen better. Nathaniel's brow pulled tight. She'd have been proud of who you are now. Marigold looked at him. You don't know all of it. I don't need to, he said. What matters is what you've done since. She turned the photograph face down on the table. I want to be someone who builds something that lasts. You already are, he said. The next day, they cleared the earth in front of the porch, their boots caked in soil by mid-morning. Marigold dug with a rhythm all her own, pausing only to wipe her brow and push her braid back. Nathaniel worked beside her, quiet as always, but his eyes never strayed far from her hands. You ever think about marriage? She asked, not looking up. He straightened slowly. I have. She kept digging. I mean now. I do, he said. Do you? She set the spade aside. I never thought I'd want it again, but this feels different. He stepped closer, his gloves hanging from his belt. I wouldn't ask unless I meant to keep you safe and known. All the days ahead. She reached for his hand. I want to be yours, Nathaniel. Not because I need to be, but because I choose it. The words settled between them like roots into soil sure, deep, alive. 3 days later, they rode to the circuit preacher's cabin in the next valley. The man was gray-bearded and quick with scripture, but he smiled when he saw the way they stood side by side, their hands already joined. Marigold didn't wear white. She wore the calico dress, clean and pressed, and a shawl against the wind. Nathaniel wore his best boots and a vest Marigold had mended months before. There were no guests, no music, only the sound of wind in the cottonwoods and the preacher's quiet voice. When it was done, they didn't kiss right away. Nathaniel simply looked at her, and Marigold, smiling, reached up to rest her fingers at the base of his throat. Now I'm home, she said. He took her hand. So am I. That night, back at the cabin, the fire burned low and the air outside carried the hush of a world still waking from winter. They sat close on the edge of the cot, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. And for the first time, there was no watchfulness in the way she touched him, no hesitation in the way he held her. Only the quiet certainty of two people who had earned this peace, who would now keep it together. The past no longer pressed at the door. It had been weathered, like wood grown strong from storms. What remained was something whole, and it would hold. The spring rains came soft and steady, washing clean the last of the snow from the gullies and leaving the pastures green and thick with new grass. Marigold stood barefoot by the rain barrel, skirts gathered in one hand, her other dipped into the cool water. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, the scent of wet earth and wood smoke curling in the air between them. I found something in the root cellar, she said without turning. He stepped out onto the porch, boots silent on the damp boards. What kind of something? She looked over her shoulder. A small chest, tucked behind the old cider press, has your initials carved into the lid. Nathaniel came down the steps. I'd forgot all about that. She dried her hands on her apron. There's a stack of old letters inside, and a knife with a carved handle. Looked like it belonged to someone you cared about. He paused at the edge of the yard. My brother. He died out near Dodgeback in '69. I kept the knife because it was the last thing he owned that hadn't been pawned or lost. She nodded once and stepped aside as he walked past her toward the barn. She followed. Inside, the horses shifted in their stalls, hooves muffled against straw. Nathaniel opened the tack trunk and pulled out a worn saddle blanket. "I never talk about him," he said, eyes on the fabric. "He was wild. Wouldn't stay in one place long enough to see a season change. But he taught me how to track a herd, how to find water when the land's dry, how to keep my promises even when no one's watching." Marigold leaned against the stall door. "You kept that promise when you took me in." He met her eyes. "There's a peace here I never thought I'd earn. But you brought it with you." She walked toward him, her hand brushing the edge of the blanket. "I think we found it together." They spent the next days building a new chicken coop farther from the house, where the ground stayed drier. Marigold insisted on painting the door a pale blue, and Nathaniel didn't argue. In the evenings, she worked on a patchwork quilt from scraps of old shirts and flour sacks, her stitches small and certain. One morning, she woke before him and stood at the window, watching the first light spill across the fields. "I want to teach," she said when he came up behind her. He rested his chin lightly on her shoulder. "Children, anyone," she said, "women like me. How to read, how to write their names, how to keep ledgers and letters." He wrapped his arms around her waist. "There's space in the old shed. We could clear it out, fit a table, some benches." She turned in his arms. "You'd help me with that?" "I'd help you with anything that gives you purpose." Her eyes filled with something quiet and strong. "Then that's what I'll do." Summer warmed the land slowly. Marigold's teaching shed took shape one board at a time, and by July, 2 women from town came each week to learn. They brought their children, who played in the tall grass under Marigold's watchful eye. Nathaniel mended fences and built benches with smooth edges, taking breaks to drink cold water from the dipper she left on the porch. At night, they sat side by side on the steps, her head resting on his knee, his fingers trailing along the seam of her sleeve. "I never expected this," she said one evening, voice thick with wonder. He looked out at the land they'd shaped together. "Neither did I." By harvest, the garden behind the house overflowed. Marigold canned tomatoes and pickled beans, her hands sure and quick. Nathaniel stacked firewood under the eaves and repaired the shingles before the first frost. Their days moved in rhythm, quiet and full, each one building on the last. On the anniversary of their wedding, she woke to the smell of cinnamon and found him in the kitchen, a pie cooling on the windowsill. "I tried to make it like the one you spoke of last fall," he said, brushing flour from his hands. She tasted it, eyes shining. "It's better." That night, they danced slowly to the sound of the wind in the trees, her feet bare on the wooden floor, his hands steady at her back. No music but the hush of their breaths, no steps but the ones they made together. Years passed. The shed grew into a schoolhouse. Children learned to spell and read beneath the rafters Nathaniel had raised. Marigold taught with her sleeves rolled and chalk dust on her skirts. Nathaniel ran cattle and built a smokehouse with hands that never trembled. They grew older but never apart. One winter, they walked the ridge above the creek, snow crunching beneath their boots. She tucked her hand into his coat, and he pulled her close. "We made it further than I ever dreamed," she said. He kissed her temple. "That's because we walked it together." She smiled then, soft and sure. And in that quiet, snowbound world, there was nothing left undone. No ghosts in the corners. No fear in the dark. Only the warmth of a home built from kindness, and 2 hearts that had learned, slowly and fully, how to beat in time. They lived like that for the rest of their days side by side, hand in hand, their love a steady fire that never once went out.